take your. Okay, so let's do this lesson design. And so it's a really, as you know, important piece of teaching. But I always say that it's just one of the pieces. But the piece that is important is that you are taking into consideration all the other pieces. And we'll kind of talk about that as we go through here. And so here we are. So what I'd like you to do is to put into the chat what your questions are, so that, and you may not have questions, that's fine, you're just coming for a review. But if you put in the chat what your questions are, then hopefully I can address them as we go along. So just spend a minute there adding to the chat if you have a specific question. And also knowing that you can actually ask questions all throughout. Like, don't feel like this is your only opportunity for questions. So I'll just wait for a moment. I'm going to stop the share so I can see the chat. I'm hearing somebody typing, so I'm guessing there's a question coming. Okay, well, maybe not yet. That's fine too. Like, we'll keep going. Oh, there is one there. Okay. Yes, I would say keeping it simple. So I'm hoping that I'll kind of address that as we go out. Yes, differentiating instruction. So I will say about that. Now, I'm not sure of people who are not in one of my cohorts. I'm not entirely sure what your instructors have done. I don't do differentiated instruction until the new year. And my reasoning behind that is I want you to get a good handle on just going for the lesson for the grade level, but we will talk about differentiating instruction because it's actually not really mysterious. It's part of what you're learning. Are there specific types of activities, lesson structures that are best for middle school? And I would say, Catherine, I would say yes to that. I would say I'd really encourage you to use a lot of graphic organizers. And let me send a document to your instructors that might be helpful in that regard for JI, because I feel like JI's, their developmental stage is very much around developing independence, developing social emotional skills. They can be chatty, so bring that in. So do some cooperative learning kinds of activities, etc., that is going to allow them the opportunity to talk while still learning, and then the use of graphic organizers. So Catherine, I'm going to send that to all the fundamentals instructors, so you'll see what I've been doing with my group. Interpreting the curriculum, that's tough for sure. How I increase my ability, how much time component. Yes, we're going to talk about that. And yeah, so Susan, I'm guessing when designing your first lessons, you're talking about interpreting the curriculum. Would that be fair to say? And I'm going to talk, Rochelle, I'm going to talk about the expectations. Okay, so this is a start. Let's just go back to the screen share. And so whenever we think of lesson design, whether that's one lesson, or I don't know whether the other instructors have already launched into unit design. I'm also going to do a clinic probably in another week after you've been there for a bit, so you know whether or not you're teaching a unit. I'll do it kind of after schoolish, same idea, an hour and a half, so we can do the same idea for unit planning. But essentially for both of them, lesson and unit planning, we talk about thinking with the end in mind. And so the important piece is for you to start with the curriculum expectations. So I will say my experience when you go to practicum, especially the November practicum, and this will be the same next year as well, is that the associate teachers are in a reporting time. And because they're in a reporting time, they're gathering data. They are not going to just say, oh, go and do whatever you want. They need information for the report card that's coming at the end of the month or early December. So they're probably going to really guide you in terms of what expectations need to be covered, because for them, they need the data to put into the report card. So the idea is to think about your grade and what are the expectations that I need to cover in this particular lesson, or if they ask you to do a unit, what am I covering in the unit? And so going back to the question about expectations, you need to think about how many expectations there actually are in terms of over the whole year. You know what that looks like. There's tons of them. So you need to get regularly in the habit of looking to cluster 3 or 4 expectations. Now, and we're going to look at a literacy lesson today. So let's say we're doing a literacy lesson. I'm probably going to cluster 3 or 4 expectations. And when you're reading the curriculum documents, they've done a pretty good job of clustering as well. So it's not that they're jumping all over the place. They're putting ones together. So, you know, grade 1, 1.1A and 1B are often very complementary to each other. If you can include a different subject in your lesson design, and for sure you're doing this in unit planning. So if I'm doing a grade 1 lesson, potentially I could target in there an art or 1 or 2 art expectations. So now I might be up to 5 because I'm having them read something, I'm having them write something, and maybe I'm having them draw something. So I can pull from my arts expectations. I could even pull my phys ed into it, because let's say, for example, and we're going to look at this today, we're going to do a grade 1 lesson just because it was just fast and I thought it would make the point. So in this grade 1 lesson, they're looking at patterning. And so in patterning, I could actually put a phys ed expectation 1 or 2 in there where they're doing movement with patterning. What you want to do is when you are integrating subjects, so it's one thing to do just a single subject, all literacy, all math, all social studies. But when you start integrating other subjects, you want to make sure that what you're asking them to do aligns with the major focus of the lesson. That's really important. You're always going to go back to that. And so you're also going to use learning goals. Now, with the Madeline Hunter template that we have used in PJ, they have the learning goals in there. Other lesson plans that you may have seen or used in the past may not have the lesson goals. The lesson goals are really there. They're designed to help you focus your planning. So I'm going to say, what are my curriculum expectations and what are the learning goals for this lesson? Those learning goals are taken right out of the expectations, but it's helping me plan what I want them to learn and do as a result of those expectations. Then my next step is to decide what assessment tools am I going to use. Now, the thing is this is not going to be removed from your input modeling and demonstration and from your practice. It's not going to be removed from that, because chances are whatever you have them do for practice, they're going to write a journal entry. They're going to do a worksheet. They're going to build a model. All of that becomes your assessment tool. So it's like you're thinking at the same time, assessment and practice. And then you want to choose a mental set that is going to, or a minds-on activity that is going to pique their interest. So if this is something, let's say space, where they've never been to space, they've probably read about it, heard about it, my mental set might be something to get them curious about space. But if I'm doing a literacy or a math lesson, my mental set actually might be a review of what they've done the day before, a quick review to remind them. So the idea here is I'm getting their minds on what's coming in this lesson. It doesn't have to be long. It can be just a couple of minutes, or it could be maybe up to, say, 10 minutes. It's not going to be half a lesson though. And so then I'm going to decide for myself, okay, does my mental set relate in some way to the expectations? Either I'm reviewing for them or I'm setting them up. And then I think, okay, so now I have my curriculum expectations. What do I need to teach them? What do I need to give them in the form of input, modeling, and demonstration? So am I using a video? Am I getting them to read something and do some inquiry? Am I demonstrating or modeling for them something that they are ultimately going to do? So my input, modeling, and demonstration, you want to think of it as the teaching time or the learning time, because if it could be self-inquiry, that's also possible. So I now I'm thinking, is the content that I'm teaching, is that fulfilling the expectations that I've chosen? And then once I know what I'm teaching them, what I'm giving them, what I'm inputting into their heads, then I have to decide, okay, now how are they going to show me what they know, which is the practice. So the practice is also aligned to those curriculum expectations. So when I'm planning, I'm always going to go back to my curriculum expectations to see, does this actually fit? Sometimes people make a mistake when they think, you know what, I really love this book. This is a fun book. The kids are going to love it. And so instead of planning with the expectations in mind and putting the book into those expectations, they forget about the expectations. They use the book as the planning, and then they're off because the expectations don't fit the book. So always do the expectations first and then choose the book or then choose the video, etc. And always you are checking. So you're checking their understanding. You're checking their understanding for the content. So before they go to work on their own, you check their understanding of the expectations that you've taught them. So if the expectations were that they add numbers to 100, when you check their expectations, you're randomly checking, do they know numbers up to 100? You're also checking, and I feel this is one that often gets left out. You're also checking when I release them to go off and work on their own, are they understanding what they're supposed to do? And this is true kindergarten to grade 8. There's loads of kids we have in our classes who really, part of their whole MO is attention seeking or a lack of listening. So instead of paying attention or listening to what the expectations are for the practice, they just sit there and don't bother because they know they can come to you right after the lesson and you're going to tell them. So before you send them off to the practice, do a little check for understanding. Let them tell you what they're going to do. You could do that by a think, pair, share. Tell your partner what you're going to do, and then you randomly select people to share it out loud. Or it could be you ask an open-ended question and you pick random people to tell you. In that case, you probably want to pick 4 or 5 kids, because if you just picked one kid, it could be that that one kid knows what to do, but the rest of them don't. So you want to make sure you get enough of a sample. Are they familiar with what's going to do? You could do thumbs up, thumbs down. Are you going to draw a picture? No. Are you going to read this worksheet and fill it in? Yes. Okay, so you could do that as your check for understanding. So for my people, there's already on Pepper I forget what it is, 150 or 105 or something ways to check understanding. Or maybe it's not that many, maybe it's only 50, but I'll put that in the package to send to the other fundamentals instructors. So you're checking the expectations. Is everything aligned? You're checking that they're achieving the expectations. So while they are actually working at their desks, you're wandering around, you might be taking small groups to conference, but even while they're working at their desks, you're checking their understanding of are they with you? So I created this little model over here that I feel is just like to understand the trajectory. Curriculum expectations first, then your assessment tool, which is actually your practice. And then what are you teaching them? Input, modeling, and demonstration, or the content they need to meet the expectations. And then what is the practice going to look like? And then are you checking their understanding? So that's the first part. So then I need to say to myself, okay, so all throughout, am I hitting the expectations? And I think when we get to another slide, this may help some of you focus this, because what I've done is I put them down the side. Sometimes I think when we use that Madeline Hunter template, the expectations are at the top and you're not as inclined to go back to the top. Whereas if it's at the side, you might see it. So you are free to create your lesson plan in whatever way you like. I use Madeline Hunter to teach because I feel it's the most comprehensive with all the elements that need to be present. So you keep asking yourself, are they hitting the expectations? And then you're going to bring closure to the lesson. So you're not just going to say, okay, that's it, it's done, see you after recess. But if you can, stop and even have them do a quick reflection, because in practicum, timing is often a thing. People often run out of time. It's very, very common. So when you're watching the clock, because you're going to get familiar with always having your eyes on the clock, when you're watching the clock, if you see you're starting to run out of time, maybe just stop the lesson where they are and get them to do a quick reflection. It could be, tell me one thing you learned, or it could be, tell your partner, and then you pick people. You could give them the exit ticket that you've maybe already got for checking their understanding or for closure, because even though you didn't finish the lesson, you want to know, can I go on the next day? Can I carry on to part 2 of the lesson? Or do I have to repeat the lesson in some way, or take a small group because not all of them got it? So that little bit of closure is going to give you a lot of information, and you want it to involve as many students as possible. That's why, like, something like an exit ticket, a journal reflection, 3, 2, 1, 3 things I learned, 2 things I still want to learn, and 1 thing I know, or whatever, however way you want to design that. It could be that you have done a KWL chart with them. And so on that last bit of the lesson, they're doing something they learned. So it gives you information about what they've learned in that particular lesson, and can you move on? So in those examples, it involves everybody because they're all doing their own individual thing. But if you're kind of rushed for time, you could do something as simple as thumbs up. Did you understand? Or do you feel like you fully understand? Thumbs up if you did, thumbs down if you didn't. So I'm going to do a quick glance around the room, and I'm going to see 75% of them put their thumbs up. So that means I can go ahead. But if a lot of them have their thumbs down, then I need to review that lesson before moving them forward. It's also with a think, pair, share. You could get them to think to themselves for a minute, pair up and share what they learned, and then you randomly pick people. But in that case, in order to involve as many of the students as possible, you're probably going to want to choose 6 or 7 pairs to tell you what they learned. So that gives you a good understanding of how many in the group. So closure should give you the information you need to move on to the next lesson. And remember, or just understand that closure is not homework. Homework is always an extension of the lesson or something they didn't finish. And so my reason for being so emphatic about closure not being homework is because we can never tell as teachers whether the kids have done their own homework with no intervention. It could have been a lot of intervention, or sometimes the parents just do the homework. So That's not a good assessment for us because we don't know what's gone on. So I want to close my lesson if I can on the day that I taught it. Nothing wrong with homework. I'm just saying it's not necessarily closure. It's not closure. Then you want to choose instructional strategies that really engage the students. So as my students know, or teacher candidates know, standing and delivering, talking at the students for 20 minutes or so is not engaging the students. So I want to make sure that whatever instructional strategies I choose are going to not only engage them, I'm going to be thinking about their multiple ways of knowing. So am I using verbal linguistic all the time? Am I using logical mathematical or visual spatial? Or am I using a variety? And there's no possible way in one lesson you can hit all of those targets. It would water down the lesson. But think over the course of the week, am I giving them opportunities to learn and give back through their practice using different ways of knowing? You also want to give them opportunities to process what they've learned. So processing might be you turn to your partner, you talk to your small group. I go around as the teacher and sit with small groups and do a little conferencing while they're working so that I can tell what they're doing, they're processing, they're thinking about it. I also want to be careful about framing the questions. How are my questions framed? I don't want to use closed-ended questions that will beg the answer yes or no. So things like can you, will you, did you, all of those could be yes or no, but you need more information than that. So for my teacher candidates, you know about Bloom's taxonomy. With the rest of you, I'm not sure whether you did it or you didn't, but it's worth looking at Bloom's taxonomy because it helps you to open up the questions, to use different ways of asking them so that they give you more information. So let's see, did you build a bridge using wood? The answer could be yes or no, but I could add to that question, explain or tell me how. It's better to stay away from those yes, no questions, but if you fall into it, which we all do from time to time, make sure you get them to explain, to tell you how, explain the process, because all of that is actually going to lead them, no matter what grade you're teaching, it's all going to lead them to the EQAO. And so, the primary people are leading to grade 3 EQAO, the junior people are leading to grade 6 EQAO, and the grade 7s and 8s are leading to the grade 9 and 10 literacy tests. So be thinking about that. I would also be thinking that I'm not just going to talk at them, I'm also going to use visuals. So whether it's I'm writing things on a chart, or I'm writing on a chalkboard or a smart board, or I have a PowerPoint, not only are they hearing my voice, but they're also seeing some kind of visual to back it up. And so that can be anything. It doesn't have to be, like on your PowerPoint that you have every single thing you're going to say. That will not serve you well. But the main points so they can follow along with you is very helpful. And then you want to remember that time on task, so the time that they're spending listening to you teach them something, is their age plus 2 minutes. So for all of us, the oldest that in this particular group, the oldest kid is going to be 14. That's the oldest kid up till grade 8. So even there, you can only talk for 16 minutes. Grade kindergartens and grade 1s, you can only talk for 5 or 6 minutes, right? So the age of the students plus 2 minutes. Now, it doesn't mean that your lesson is only going to be 16 minutes long. What it means is that's the amount of time you can talk to them. Then you want to change the energy. So I might be teaching them about government, let's say, and I could talk to those older kids for that period of time. So that's going to be grade 5 or grade 6. So let's say they're 10 years old in grade 5. I could talk to them for 12 minutes, but then I need to change the energy. And maybe that's something as simple as turn to your partner and reflect on what you just learned. It doesn't have to be a brain break, but it could be. It can be something as simple as turning to your partner, or it could be something as simple as you've been listening to me for 12 minutes. Now write down a few sentences or start your mind map, because maybe they're doing mind mapping as they go through. So I'm just going to stop the share because I see Arsh's hand is up. What can I help you with, Arsh?
Hi, Jackie. So for example, I'm doing kindergarten, right? For my first placement. Would you suggest that, like, when I'm doing the lesson, are you like, and somebody's observing it, are you expecting to only observe the like carpet talk time, or are you going to be looking at the whole lesson where I then send them off to centers?
Yeah, so you're talking about your faculty advisor, right?
Yes, and that's you actually.
It's me. So so the lesson, you might say the lesson is 40 minutes long, or for the older grades, the 7s and 8s, the lesson is 60 minutes or even 75 minutes long. Whoever your faculty advisor is going to come and watch the duration of the lesson most of the time. They're going to come and watch the whole duration. But for me, I'm going to be saying, if I saw you're teaching in kindergarten and you had those kids sitting on the carpet for 20 minutes, I'm probably going to say, I think it was a little bit too long. You could have them stand up and shake their willies out, or, you know, march around the class and then come back, anything like that. But even for those older kids, we make a mistake if we think that they can pay attention for longer. In that case of the junior intermediate kids, 14 minutes. And you know yourself, whenever you've been in a class, and I would be highly suspicious if you made it all the way through undergrad and not had to sit there for 2 or 3 hours listening to a talking head, because that's kind of their MO. But you want to make sure that you're changing the energy, and it can be something as simple as just turn to your partner, or, you know, put your head down and write something or something like that.
So like if I'm doing like a read aloud, obviously that's going to be more than 5-6 minutes, depends on the length of the book. So then I could do more than 5 to 6 minutes, but then you would expect brain like some sort of changing the energy.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because there might be times when it goes over a little bit. And quite honestly, when I taught kindergarten, I taught with a woman who those kids would sit on the carpet and they wouldn't move for like 25, 30 minutes. But why? They were afraid of her. So that's very different than you're going to sit there for 10 minutes and read this book, because kids get so engaged in stories. And even the older kids, they will get engaged when you're reading to them. So there might be some times when you go over the limit. Absolutely. Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm just
Okay.
nervous about doing this two lessons a day.
Not to worry. It'll be fine. It will be fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's carry on now. And so here's some grade 1 lessons that I took right from the curriculum documents. So the first one there is read a few different types of literacy tests, examples, gives you examples, pattern books, rhymes, books from home, simple fiction, graphic tests, etc. And then informational texts. So right away here, when I'm looking at this expectation, I'm thinking, okay, it's telling me to read a few different types of literacy texts and informational texts. So I could think about this. My kids are 6, they're grade 1, they're 6 years old. So I know that the most I'm going to be able to talk to them is 8 minutes. And I'm going to think, all right, now in this particular lesson, do I have to actually cover the whole expectation today? Or can I do one type of literacy text today and another type tomorrow? Both would be fine. It would also be fine to give them, for example, a pattern book and a simple nonfiction book on the same day in the same lesson. And so then if I decide to do that, then I have to think, okay, well, how are they going to show me what they know and how are they going to show me that they've read pattern book and a simple nonfiction book. So I have to think that in my mind. But now I've also chosen 1.2 there, which is identify different purposes for reading and choosing reading materials appropriate for those purposes. So for example, picture books for entertainment, information, etc. You can read all of that. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to think, okay, so now they have to tell me different purposes for the book. So I think I'm actually going to choose to introduce them to a pattern book and a simple nonfiction book, because then they can tell me the purpose for a pattern book and the purpose for a nonfiction book. So I'm unpacking it as I'm reading my expectations. And now 1.3 is identify a few reading comprehension strategies and use them before, during, and after reading to understand text. And so initially with the support and the direction. So I stop and I think to myself, well, what do I know that is a strategy I can use for them to identify these reading strategies? So I think what I'm going to do for my learning goals, I'm just going to stop the share so I can write in my, so I can write as we're going along here. So I think in my learning goals now, I've thought to myself, all right, I think I can do this. I can get them to read 2 books, or I might read them for them, 2 books. A pattern book and a nonfiction book. Now I can decide on those later. I don't need to know what they are right now. And then in that, I might get them to, because they have to identify the purpose. So I'm probably going to get them to identify the purpose for a pattern book and a nonfiction book. So they're going to do that because that's going back to the expectation, identify. Sorry, I'm hopeless when it comes to typing on the spot. All right, and then 1.3 there is I want them to understand some comprehension strategies. Now remember, this is one lesson. I'm probably not going to teach them 5 or 6 different comprehension strategies because there are only 6. They're not going to be able to keep that all in their minds. So I'm actually going to tell them or teach them the retell, relate, and reflect strategy. That's the strategy I'm going to teach them today, because I know that maybe tomorrow I can teach them another comprehension strategy, because this is one that's probably going to last for longer than just a couple of days. So these are my learning goals. Now, I also want them to practice working with a partner, because that's important to me. So they're going to work with partners. And because they're working with partners, I want to get them to use the social objective of attentive listening and sharing materials. Okay, because I'm in my mind, I'm thinking I'll get them to share a picture book, share books. So those are 2 strategies, right? So here's where I've got my learning goals, and do they relate to the expectations? Yes, they do. Number 1 that I have here on my learning goals is actually going to take care of this one up here, 1.1. Number 2 that I have on my learning goals is going to take care of 1.2. And number 3 is going to take care of 1.3. And then my social goals go together with all of them. So let me stop the share and see if that makes sense to everyone, or does anyone have a question? Okay, we're good. like I said, don't hesitate to ask questions. Okay, so now we have our learning goals.
Sorry, Jackie, could I ask?
Sure.
Could you give some suggestions about how to do the purpose? How to get kids to explain the purpose for books?
Could I put something in there for the purpose?
Or,
Oh, okay.
or
Oh,
just
yeah.
some
So in my lesson now, because I have an idea in my mind, in my lesson now, I want my students, because that's part of it, right? Part of it is that they have to come up with why they're reading something. So I'm going to read them a pattern book, and I'm going to read a nonfiction book to them. And I'm probably going to do something like, why would we read a pattern book? Like, what would be fun about that pattern book? Or why do we need to know that? And then they're going to come up, they will, trust me, come up with things like, because we're learning about patterns. Or sometimes it's just for fun. But then I might read, like I'm thinking I'm just going to throw this out there because we're going to do this a little bit more. But if I said as I plan this lesson, the pattern book I'm going to read is Brown Bear, Brown Bear. So I don't know if you've seen these books, but they're very repetitive books. Brown Bear, Brown Bear. Of course, I don't remember when I'm trying to do it, but anyway, it's a pattern book.
What do you see?
Thank
What
you.
do you see?
I see Baba looking at me.
I love it. I love it. That's exactly. And those books are amazing, and they're so well illustrated. They're just beautiful. So Brown Bear, what do you see? So I'm going to read that. And then I might stop and say to them, okay, what did you see? And get them to talk about patterns. And then I might read a simple nonfiction book about brown bears. And so let them tell me what the differences are. I might even do with grade ones, a graphic organizer of a Venn diagram. Make sense? Okay. And so let's run with that, actually, just what I just said. Okay. So here we have, and I will send, how am I going to do this? It's okay. You'll get it. So, all right. So now we're going to plan. So I've got my expectations, and here they are at the side again, exact same expectations. So I'm going to say to myself, all right, I need to figure out assessment here. So what am I going to do that is going to help me assess whether or not the kids get this 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 thing? Whoops, I went past it there. So what I just said, for example, was assessment is I'm going to have them do a Venn diagram. All right, so that's going to be my assessment tool. So it's going to be a Venn diagram, and they are going to work together. So I'm assessing the Venn diagram. I might actually I might also, as assessment, I might get them to tell me what the pattern is. So I might get them to look at the pattern. I might get them to tell me what the difference is, but that's all in a guided part. That's not something they're doing on their own. They're going to do this Venn diagram as my assessment. And then I'm also going to, so they're telling me what the purpose is, and that's probably something that we've done together. And it could also be, I think another way to do this would be what I would call post-it pileup. So they have to, I have a chart that says pattern book, nonfiction book. And they have to, and then I put at their table a whole bunch of pattern books, a whole bunch of nonfiction books, and then they have to put a sticky note on the chart that is saying which one is the pattern book, which one is the nonfiction book. So I can see if they can tell the difference between pattern and nonfiction. And then I'm probably going to talk to them so that I get for the second one there, what's the purpose? Maybe while they're working with their partner, I'm going around and I'm talking to them to they tell me what the purpose is, and I'm making some kind of anecdotal note there. But the last one, retell, relate, reflect, is what I decided. And so with grade 1, they're going to be able to do that, whether they write it down. But notice here, this is an important thing. This really applies more to primary than it does junior intermediate. But with retell, relate, reflect, notice here, I do not have a spelling expectation. So I'm not worried about spelling in this. I just want them to retell, relate, reflect. And so I'm going to teach them what that means. So I might say to them, okay, so we're going to read this book, Brown Bear, Brown Bear. And I want them, a few of them, to retell, because I'm getting them to model or demonstrate for the other kids. I'm getting a few of them to retell what the story was about. So they're simply saying it was about a bear who was out in the woods and he was looking for stuff. And then I might get a few of them, my modeling will be relating. Well, it relates to me because I like to go out in the woods and I like to look for berries and nuts and flowers and all of that. So it relates to me. And then I may get them to reflect all of this even before the book might be finished. It might be, I wonder what's going to happen to this bear at the end of the story. And so then they have to reflect or predict. Or if I didn't want to stop them, I just wanted to read the book and then have them do retell, relate, reflect, I could say to them, okay, I wonder how you could use this book in your real life. And I might model by saying, oh, I could read the book to my mom, or I could read the book to my sister. So I get them to reflect how they might use the book. Or on the other side, they're using the nonfiction book about brown bears. I might get them to say, well, I could use this for a project on bears. So I'm getting them to reflect ahead. So when I decide on my assessment, so I've decided my assessment is going to be the Venn diagram and the retell, relate, reflect. And then how am I modeling for them, or what's the input I'm giving them? I'm reading Brown Bear. And as I'm going through it, I'm modeling the patterning. I'm being very specific about patterning. And then I'm talking about the other book about bears, the nonfiction book about bears. And then I'm going to be modeling the retell, relate, reflect. As well, I'm going to be showing them a Venn diagram because this might be new for them. So I also have to show them about the Venn diagram. So then I'm going to do a check for understanding. Tell me what you're going to do when you go back to your seats. And as I said, thumbs up, thumbs down, think, pair, share, whatever. But I know that they know they're going to do a Venn diagram and they're going to do a retell, relate, reflect. And so then the practice I've already determined is they will complete a Venn diagram. With grade 1, I'm probably going to have it already prepared. Older kids, you don't need to do that. They can create their own Venn diagram. So they do the Venn diagram. And then I may either have a worksheet with retell, relate, reflect, or I might conference with them, or I might give them little sticky notes. So as they're going through the book, they can put a sticky note what they're going to retell, how it relates to them, and then the reflect is wondering how they're going to use it. So there's the practice. And so now I'm going to check their understanding. So I've already said what I'm checking their understanding for when they go back, like what they're going to do when they're at their seats. My check for understanding during is I'm getting them to identify the patterns. I'm getting them to identify the nonfiction. I'm getting them to tell me different purposes for the book. Why would they use that kind of book? And then I'm going around and I'm watching them, I'm sitting with them. So that's happening during their practice. And then I want to bring closure. So now I already have a Venn diagram and I already have another piece of assessment material, which could be the retell, relate, reflect. And so my closure could be go around a community circle telling me one thing they either enjoyed about one of the books, because that goes back to the purpose here, or it goes back to different literary texts. So they could say, I liked the pattern book because it made me happy, or I liked the nonfiction book because I learned something about bears. And so I want them to tell me. It could be an exit ticket, but I would say, you know what, they've done a fair amount of writing here. So I'm probably going to get them to do something other than writing. And it might be just a tell me, or it could be a draw something, draw a picture. It could be, if you're running out of time, tell your partner, share with your partner what your favorite book was, and then one of the two partners shares. So now we only have half the group sharing instead of the whole group. And then I want to do a personal reflection. I know we don't talk about this when we're talking about lesson planning, but I always want to sit back and reflect. How did that go? Who really got into it? Who didn't get into it? Which kids are ready to move on? Which kids are not ready to move on? So here I've gone step by step to get them to meet these expectations. So let's go back to this right now. And so I'm going to go back to this slide. And I want you to think about, we've decided we're going to read one pattern book and one nonfiction book. And so in this case, I had said, Brown Bear is my pattern book. And I'm going to call it Life of a Brown Bear. That's our nonfiction book. Okay, Life of a Brown Bear is our nonfiction. So that's my learning goal. So I know specifically what I'm using. And then I want to get them to identify the purpose. So as I read it, then I'm going to get them to tell me, why do you think we'd have this? And why do you think we'd have this? Maybe I'm making a chart. I've got a chart that has pattern books and a chart that has nonfiction books, and I'm writing it in. How do you think? Why do you think they use them? Then I have to teach them retell, relate, reflect. And then I also have to tell them what the social objective is. So the learning goals can become your stated objectives. And this is an area where I think some people fall down because they're not necessarily seeing the purpose of stating the objectives. But it's to help the kids frame their mindset. It's to get their minds on. It's kind of an extension of a mental set, if you will. So we do our mental set, get them all piqued in their interest, and then we say, okay, today you're going to read 2 books, a pattern book and a nonfiction book. You're also going to tell me the purpose of each book. And you're going to learn a new strategy called retell, relate, reflect. And I'm also watching for how well you are using attentive listening and sharing your books. Because I want to state up front, I'm also holding them accountable for their personal learning skills, or in this case, social emotional skills. So in elementary school, we are actually assessing those skills. In secondary school, we're not. Okay, so these are my learning goals, which then become my stated objectives. Okay, so they are now. And the stated objectives are in language that the kids understand. They're not something over and above. I have to tell them in their language. I can't use the language of the curriculum here. Okay, so now that I have that, then I have determined my input, modeling, and demonstration is right here. I'm reading the 2 books. That's my input for them. I'm talking about the differences between them. And then I'm showing them as well Venn diagram and retell, relate, and reflect. Sorry, I forgot to say in here, we're using a Venn diagram. Okay. So I know that I have to teach them the difference. I know that I have to teach them the purpose. I know that I have to teach them Venn diagram and retell, relate, and reflect. Okay, so let me stop the share. What are your questions? Jess, you're giving me a hand signal, but I can't quite tell what it is. Oh, it's okay? Okay.
A masterpiece. That was a masterpiece.
Oh, all right. Anybody else with a question? Okay, so let's go back here and we're going to look at these expectations. All right, so forget this. Forget the learning goals that I have done with you. Look at those 3 expectations and give me some ideas for what other input and practice your students might do if they're using these expectations. Anybody have an idea? Susan?
Sorry, did you want us to just come up with some other? Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
What about comparing the difference between like a comic book, like a nonfiction science book, and maybe like even a song? Because a song
Absolutely.
has text.
Absolutely. And so if you notice what Susan just gave us the ideas for are all there. They're all examples right here in 1.1. So I use the example of pattern book and a nonfiction book, but it doesn't have to be that. And with grade 1s, I would say you could probably throw in one more. You could put a song in there, but I wouldn't go over that. With the older kids though, grade 7s and 8s, 6, 7s and 8s, you could have 4 or 5 different kinds and they're doing the same idea, but now their Venn diagram is much bigger than just 2. They've got like the 3 or the 4 or the 5 Venn diagram. So they're comparing and using. So the same thing would apply because you're going to have similar expectations to this in grade 7 and 8. Absolutely. Anybody else have an idea? Because what I want to get you to see is the connection between the input modeling and demonstration and the practice with these expectations. Okay, that's the most important thing. I keep seeing Jess move forward and I'm thinking she's going to turn off her mute. Sorry, I'm just watching you because you're the first one there.
No problem. I'm reading it, but an idea I had was maybe a book about the different changes of the seasons and then looking at a calendar.
That's a perfect idea. Look at the connection there as well, right? So changing of the seasons, and now we have a calendar, and how do they interconnect? Why are they related, right? Rebecca.
Yeah, so this goes back then to my first question in the chat of how to keep an overview of all the different strands of the curriculum, because Jess's idea, which I think is great, fits also into the science curriculum for grade 1, where you go through the different changes of the season. So at which point do I call this now literacy, and at which point do I call it science, and is it not all one mishmash?
Yeah, so you're making a very good point, because you can also, if you're thinking of that idea with the calendar, you can also include math in there. So that's a really important question you're asking. The title, if you will, of the lesson in that case is probably going to be the one that has the most significant expectations. So if you have 3 or 4 expectations, but you're throwing in 1 or 2 math expectations or 1 or 2 science expectations, it's still going to be a literacy lesson. But vice versa, and science and social studies, and for grade 7s and 8s, it becomes history and geography. For those subject areas, okay, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to back up a bit. So for those subject areas, it's very important to integrate. So let's say you're doing a history lesson. You can have the kids reading the history text or the social studies text. You can have them writing about what they're learning. So right there, it's a history lesson, but I've got language arts expectations in there. Now, having said that, in intermediate, it's going to depend on the school. You may not be the teacher who's teaching literacy, but you are teaching history. So that's where it's a little different in grade 7 and 8, and certainly in secondary school. You're not integrating in the way that you would K to 6. But again, depending on the school and how the school sets it up, you actually might be integrating. You might be the teacher who teaches English and history. Perfect. So I'm going to do double duty there. I'm going to teach my history lesson, but I'm getting them to read the textbook. They're going to be doing all kinds of writing and maybe some timelines, etc. So I can integrate my subjects. Absolutely. Anyone else with an idea or a thought? Okay, how about the second one there, the different purposes? So again, the example that Jess gave, so we're reading, we're using that calendar to tell us time, to help us keep track of time, to help us remember when we're going to do stuff. So we can get them to tell us things. With the little kids, you want, so going back to the question of differentiating instruction, with little kids, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say, okay, who in my class can write out the purpose, can literally write it or put it on Post-it notes. But I might have kids in my class who it's going to be too hard for them to write, especially on the spur of the moment. So they're drawing it. And I would say with grade 7s and 8s, because you're going to have a much more significant gap in grade 7 and 8 than you will in kindergarten, grade 1 and 2, because these are kids who've gone through and now they're 2-3 years behind. And so for differentiating instruction, that's why I'm encouraging you to use graphic organizers, because they really help to organize the thought process. But there's nothing wrong with using a scribe. There's nothing wrong with having them draw pictures, or nothing wrong with them telling you verbally as opposed to writing it down. That's differentiating the instruction. Differentiating the instruction is just giving them a different way to let you know what they know. If you are not changing the grade level, putting it down a few grades, or I mean, theoretically, gifted programming is also considered modifying the program. If you are not changing the grade level, you're simply differentiating, and that's okay. You can put all of those things into place. So identify a few different purposes for reading. I might get them to brainstorm with me. I write them on the chart or on the smart board. I could also have, smart boards are amazing. So if you get the opportunity to use it in your practicum, make sure you do. But I could also have on a smart board a whole bunch of different reasons or purposes for reading, and then they have to categorize them or drag them over to the one that matches the book, that kind of thing. And then I chose for 1.3 there, I chose identify a few reading comprehension strategies. So retell, relate, reflect is one that I like, because as kids are going through their reading, if they're reading it by themselves, let's say, they can put a little sticky in where they know what they can retell. It's something that they can actually use the words to retell. They can relate it. Oh, this reminds me of when my family went on a vacation, or this reminds me of when my family went to the zoo and we saw the brown bears, or something like that. And then they reflect. So they can actually either do it during or after the lesson. But you'll see a lot of teachers using it during. The other ones that I might be really inclined to use for a lesson like this is tell me what you know about patterns, and tell me what you want to know about patterns, or tell me what you know about bears and what you want to know about bears. And then the L at the end of the KWL can be what they learned. And the other one that my group has looked at, the RAN, which is reading and analyzing for nonfiction. So you get them to fill the chart in as they're going through, which is in the textbook. What other reading strategies might I teach my students there? So for those of you, some of you intermediate people may not be literacy, but still a reading strategy is going to be important. Anybody have a good one that you've learned? Susan?
What about getting them to act out a scene or an idea from the book?
Perfect. And like I said, with the pattern book, if you were using the pattern book, they can actually make patterns. So it's reinforcing the concept. Yeah. Anyone else have a good reading strategy? Arsh.
Jackie, could we do like instead of me sitting down at the carpet, like similar to what Susan was saying, could I assign roles and they like read their roles?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you would want to know before you do that, because this is grade 1. So before you want to do that, you want to make sure you know their reading level. So you're not putting them in a position, can that child read it? You want to make sure you know if they're going to be a solid reader when they're
So
reading.
if I'm doing this with JK, could I do like a JK paired with an SK? Maybe the
Absolutely.
SK could.
Absolutely. When I taught JKSK, they all had a buddy and they all worked together. Absolutely. Patricia, I saw your hand.
Yes, I just don't know if this was like when they use different modalities.
Yes.
So like different voices, like I in the past, I just didn't know if this was applicable for grade 1. In the past, I've done read this in a happy voice or read this in a silly voice or an angry voice, and then it makes it it's repetitive and it makes it a little bit different.
Yeah, and then you're probably getting from the curriculum some social emotional expectations there, right? So while you're getting them to read or act out, and the acting out part, you're probably gathering some expectations from the arts curriculum, but the social emotional curriculum, you're getting them to use. But when you are integrating subjects, so when you're using different subject areas, so it's a literacy lesson, but I'm putting in an arts expectation, or it's a math lesson and I'm putting in a science expectation, make sure the expectations are aligned. You don't want to put an expectation in just because you haven't covered it yet. It has to be aligned. And you know, I've seen this before where people think, oh, I'm going to have an art expectation in there. And the only art expectation is that they're teaching a math lesson, but they've got all these fancy little flowers and everything decorating the paper, and the art is coloring in the flowers. That has nothing to do with anything, right? It's just a fancy paper. So always, always, always go back to the expectations. Yeah. Anyone else with a question, thought, concern? So I'm just going to do a little review, and then people can stay behind to chat in a smaller group if you want. So remember, the curriculum expectations are the most important part, and you're always going back to them, okay? Always going back. So when you decide on your input, modeling, and demonstration, when you decide on your practice, go back and see, is that going to meet that curriculum expectation? And so for the lesson, think to yourself, what are some things I need to remember? They are things like, what instructional strategy do you use? And as I said, if you can put in there some graphic organizers, if you can put in sort of the idea of both independent and group time. So for example, I want them to do something on their own, but now I'm going to, after they finish it, I want them to partner up and talk to their partner about what they've done. Right there, you're putting in a little processing time. You're also building up that social emotional skill, if you will. Or maybe it's that we work together as a group, we talk, we process, we do something together as a group, but now we have some independent reflection time. It's not to say that you have to do this in every single lesson. Those things aren't possible. But the more you can strike that balance between some group work and some independent work, the better it's going to be. So effective instruction, some good ideas are cooperative learning, graphic organizers, remembering to put in some breaks, brain breaks. You're remembering the age plus 2 minutes so that you don't have them attending for too long. You're remembering how to frame the questions so that you're asking open-ended and higher level questioning. So think about Bloom's taxonomy. You're also putting in there this idea of assessment and how am I assessing the students? So you're probably not going to do success criteria and learning goals for every single lesson, but in your planning, you might see, I'm not really doing a unit, but for 3 days, I'm teaching lessons on government, let's say. And so I may suggest that at the beginning of those 3 lessons, you do some success criteria and some learning goals for the kids, but you don't have to do it every single time. But if you are doing units, then yes, you're going to do it every single time. Not every single time, every single unit. You're doing it at the beginning of the unit is what I meant. Yeah. Okay, so final reflections. What are you feeling right now about lesson planning? And you're going to put that another chat waterfall, put it in the chat, and so that I can see what you're thinking, and then we'll end and I will stay and answer any questions that you might have. So I hope you found it helpful. I hope the biggest thing for me is to make it clear the expectations, the input modeling and demonstration, and the practice are all aligned. Those are the 3 biggest areas. Okay, so put it in the chat. Good, I'm glad you're feeling better. Good. I love this chat waterfall. It's like such a fun thing for me. I don't know why. I'm easily amused. Good, I'm glad. All right, well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Enjoy the rest of this sunny Friday. Yes, Francis, yes, I agree with that. The morning and when it starts, absolutely. Yeah. Patricia, what's your question?
So just to reiterate, you're going to do a follow-up in about a week or so?
A unit plan one. So I'm gonna,
Oh, great.
yeah. And so what I thought was to give you a chance to get into your classroom so your teachers can say whether or not you're going to do a unit. Because for first years, the expectation is not a unit plan. But my experience is so many people get asked to do a unit plan. So I thought I would wait until sort of, like, I think maybe I'll do it next Monday, whatever that date is. I can't think of what the date is. And then you can come to the workshop or the clinic with ideas and we can sort of work through those.
Okay, so the 8th. No, sorry, the 15th.
15th.
The 15th.
Yeah. I'll send you a note in like probably by the end of the weekend. Yeah.
Okay, and it'll be like after we're done teaching.
I think, yeah,
today.
you'll be in school probably till 4 or, so I'll
Something
probably
like
do it
that.
from like 5 till 6:30 or something.
Perfect. This was very helpful. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Okay, good, Patricia.
Have-
See you. Good luck.
Have a nice
Catherine.
weekend. Thank you.
You too. Catherine, how about you?
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. That was super, super helpful.
Good.
I had one question about, I'd never heard that, so that's a great tidbit, that like age plus 2 minutes. Now,